where the leadership of individual Caribbean countries stand in relation to Western imperialism and the extent whether they have bought into it, because their silence we can only judge, whether they've bought into the enslavement or the re-enslavement of Caribbean people, or as you mentioned before, they themselves are feeling fear and without courage. What can you tell us about what you, in particular, what you're noticing and what you're learning, if anything, more about the leadership of individual Caribbean countries and collectively in this crisis?
I was telling someone yesterday who called me about this situation in Venezuela, and I was telling the person, I've been fighting this thing for 50 years, trying to make people understand what neocolonialism is, what this kakistocratic class of leaders are. But, it's interesting enough. There is an article that was written by a Trinidadian scholar a couple of weeks ago called Macaulay's Men. I will send it to you when I can find it.
Yes,
but
please.
It refers to a Lord Macaulay, who was an official of the British colonial government in India. And one of the things he said in fighting to maintain British colonization in India is to create a group of people. He said they'll be Indian in color, brown, but mentally, culturally, and otherwise, they would be British. And the article the brother wrote was called Macaulay's Men. This was the theory that Lord Macaulay put forward.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at Caribbean leadership, all of these people are Macaulay's men.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And women.
Yes.
That's something that, Mia Motley may be different. I'm not so sure. She makes some good statements at times. But my thing is, it is one thing to talk, and which is what Caribbean leaders have been good at, to talk to our emotion. They have embraced things like working class speeches and so on. And Professor Hilborn was makes an important distinction about Aaron Barrow in Barbados. Mm-hmm. He said Barrow was pro-worker, but he was pro-working class. And that's a distinction.
Yes.
Right? So they can attempt like Siaga in Jamaica, who did a lot of work on the Rasta movement and certain kinds of research on African culture in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
But Siaga was an unrepentant imperialist, a capitalist.
Yes.
And so sometimes we get confused when these people show empathy and sympathy and alignment with some of the things that we consider important. But we have to make that distinction that these people are Macaulay's men. Mm-hmm. They do not serve our interests. Mm-hmm. They serve the interests of our foreign ideas, foreign cultures, and imperialism, Western hegemony. That's who they are. And the struggle is not to put new faces in power. The struggle is to destroy the whole system and create something different. And that is why Cuba is attacked. Venezuela is attacked. For all the contradictions you may think Cuba has, and it has, and Venezuela. But the fact is that they are trying something different. They are trying to create new systems, new approaches, new organizing of economies. We can't have economies where 2% of the people benefit from the economic structure while 98% of the people live hand to mouth, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so Caribbean leaders are people who really don't serve the interests of Caribbean people. And the system itself, right, the way it is designed, cannot serve our interests. And we must come to the realization that these political and economic systems were never meant to serve our interests. And therefore, we have to challenge them and change them.
Because as this for us, the Armada in the Caribbean waters represents for us the biggest test for the Caribbean in a very long time. And we have silence to a large extent from Caribbean leaders. We have threats, of course, coming from the U.S. and so on. But at the same time, on the backside of the attack, let us take a look at what CARICOM has said in terms of its statement, we are monitoring the situation. This is CARICOM's statement. We are monitoring the situation. Before the attack, CARICOM was silent. Those who had the audacity to merely whisper dissent, like Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica, they are now under attack themselves in terms of these countries. The U.S. has suspended its visa program with these countries, and then instead of taking on the system, the imperialistic system, Caribbean leaders on this very issue have turned against themselves, seeing who can outdo the other to be America's best friend. Trinidad, of course, and Guyana winning that competition. But I think more than any time, it is sending a message to us that we are on our own. What then do you think Caribbean people need to do, especially at a moment when now we are more aware of exactly where we stand in the geopolitics of it all? So
Kabu, the thing is about this CARICOM thing. These Caribbean leaders, as you said in your statement, those who whispered, and they are mealy-mouthed people who say one thing on one side of their mouth and do something else, right? These people, my mother has a term she uses, my 94-year-old mother. She calls them court jesters.
Yes.
They are nothing more than court jesters dancing to the tune of their masters.
Very Shakespearean, yes.
The famous line, whose bread I eat is whose song I sing.
Yes.
Anyone who give them bread, that's whose song they will sing. Occasionally, they will make a statement that may surprise you, right? Mm-hmm. But the matter is always in the hands of the people, right? Caribbean people have to realize that we are one people. I was talking to a group a couple of weeks ago and using the analogy of the Chinese Civil War. The communists and the Kuomintang, the nationalists, were fighting in the Chinese Civil War. And when the Japanese invaded, despite being sworn enemies ideologically, when the Japanese invaded, they formed what was called a united front to fight the Japanese invasion. And when the Japanese were defeated, they went back to fighting each other, which ended up in the Chinese Communist Party winning the Civil War and now governs China. But the most important lesson, I think, here for Caribbean people, that the Chinese would have taught us in this situation, is to understand what are your primary contradictions and what are your secondary contradictions. Mm-hmm. The primary contradictions for the Chinese was the Japanese invasion. Their secondary contradiction was the conflict between them. Mm-hmm. And so they were able to denote that quite clearly, what their primary contradictions were and what their secondary contradictions were. And so they moved accordingly. What has happened in the Caribbean here is because of the confusion and the misleadership of these so-called leaders, we do not understand our primary contradictions and what are our secondary contradictions. So we fight each other for nonsense. Mm-hmm. You understand? When we should be looking at how do we as a group of people with similar historical and cultural experiences, right, band ourselves together to carve a space in the world that would be to our benefit. Mm-hmm. And that to me is what somehow we have to aim with. What ideas are going to guide us, right? Is it going to be socialism? Is it going to be some kind of shared values philosophy, right? All of these to me are the things we need to be discussing. There was a former president of Trinidad and Tobago, Ellis Clark, who, we never had much respect for because he was always in a party and cocktail drinking. But he made one statement that was very profound. He said, a person without a philosophy is like a vagrant.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
So vagrancy is not just the homeless person in the street. It is a person who has no philosophy, a person who believes that the pursuit of profit is the only reason for existing as a human being. And so we have to understand the role of philosophy. We have to understand what primary contradictions and secondary contradictions are, and develop ideas and operations and activities that can unite us moving forward, whether we're in Jamaica, St. Vincent, Barbados. That is what, in my opinion, we have to do. The Caribbean leaders and the systems of governance in the Caribbean has failed us. We can no longer rely on them, right? Especially given what you just said about what happened with CARICOM. When in a moment of crisis, they could not offer leadership. They could not even offer a good word of advice. They just rolled over like puppies and danced to the tune of the court master like court jesters.
It is an embarrassment, and I'm not quite sure if they're able to recognize that, because the leadership lacks empathy. The people are locked into a paradigm that is frightening. We have people who are going against the system, the status quo. We have Mamdani in New York. We have, regardless of what you think of him, we have in Burkina Faso an example in the alliance of the AES. We have examples of how nations can stand up and leaders can stand up against imperialism, oppression, and ongoing colonialism. As I'm saying this to you, I am very aware that the armada with the biggest warship in the world, quite likely, are still in the Caribbean waters. I am very aware that Caribbean countries are under threat, because we heard at the press conference yesterday, for the three persons who spoke, that basically Caribbean leaders, Caribbean countries, Caribbean people are being threatened. If you do not behave, they say, then this is also likely to happen to you. They have pointed to Cuba. Literally, Cuba is next from what they're saying, because now they're on a roll. So Caribbean, I'm aware that the Caribbean is under threat. But isn't it when the Caribbean is under threat that leaders rise in courage? What is happening?
Yes. Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, brother.
No, I said yes, and leaders are emerging. What I think is happening, it is that we are not seeing. I think in the Caribbean at times, and for a long time in our history, our leadership has been centered around the messianic idea. You know, I remember when I was in Jamaica at the conference of the PNP, Manley as the leader. Manley was Joshua. Joshua.
Yeah.
And so we have had this idea of leadership, a sort of messianic idea of leadership. What in European history they call the great man theory. So we always look for a great man, a Marcus Garvey or Eric Williams or somebody like that. Mm-hmm. And I think what is happening now is that the leadership is becoming more egalitarian. That's why we seem to think it doesn't exist, but it does. Right?
Leaderfulness as opposed to leadership. So leaderfulness. So leaders are rising up across the Caribbean, you're saying, and this is organic because people are...
Yes.
Yeah. I take the point you're making.
That's why I said in the beginning it is a moment of despair.
Yeah.
Right? But there are young people I speak to. I think I sent you a couple of the statements coming up of Trinidad, even among Indian people who are supposed to be the strongest supporters of Kamala for stability, who are attacking this idea of our subservience and our vassal state. Right? Some of these people, you don't know them. But when you look at the ideas and what they're expressing, obviously they have some leadership capabilities. Mm-hmm. So there is, whenever they said there's one action, there's always an equal and opposite reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so this pressure campaign with this armada outside of our coast will produce leaders and is producing leaders, young people in the Caribbean, who will emerge, I believe, to challenge this hegemony. I'm very optimistic about that. There are some people who tend to believe that that young people are aimless and so on. I remember, as I reminded someone, people were saying the same thing about us when we were listening to reggae music in Trinidad. They talk about, dirty, that nasty Rasta music, and so on. Every generation sometimes have a tendency to be critical of the next one.
Yes.
Yes. And so I don't want us to fall into that. And then they create these abstract terms like generation Y and Z, which alienate the elders from the young people.
Hold the line for me, brother Akko. Let me take a quick break and come back. The geopolitical issues that are now. We're in literally a geopolitical storm. The Caribbean is in that. But brother Akko, Armada, the attack on Venezuela, that was always going to happen. This is, as you pointed out earlier, an empire, an entire system is dying, and so they're doing what they do. It's a global reset. So at some point, we expect, if not Venezuela, Cuba, if not Cuba, somebody else. To what extent are other Caribbean countries likely to experience, if not quite the bombing or the kidnapping of the husband and wife from out of the bed, but America's or the system's full wrath? And then where do we go from here? I guess it's a question. KSR community.
So I think I know where do we go. It's very, very important that we discuss that. But just to go back to what you asked about the Sahel, 15 years ago, no one thought in the Sahel there would have been a Ibrahim Traore.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and out of this seamless, hopeless, despairing situation, this young man, 30 years, 20 years, 50 years, I think, emerged. And I think we are going to have, this in the Caribbean. I think you're going to see young people emerging and challenging the status. But we, the elders, have to continue to educate them and guide them. Mm-hmm. And, know when to step aside. I went to a seminar at one point, an educator I brought to Trinidad. He taught a very interesting lesson. He said, in the past, a teacher used to be a sage on the stage. Now a teacher has to be a guide to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the day of the sage on the stage is past, mm-hmm. and the guide to the side is what we have to, demonstrate now as teachers and as leaders.
Yes,
yes. But where do we go from here? Let me quote Gramsci here on this, on modernity, because we live in the modern world. As he says mm-hmm. here, the challenge of modernity is to live without illusions and without becoming disillusioned. He said, I am pessimistic because of my intelligence, but I am an optimist because of my will.
Mm-hmm.
He said, because of my will, I am an optimist.
Mm-hmm.
And Castro would always say, we have to imagine a different world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we were to fuse both Fidel and Gramsci, I would say, where do we go from here? Is to create a different society, to will something into being, will a new existence into reality, and not the existence that we have of destitution, poverty, homelessness, of a parasitic class exploiting our resources and working in tandem with interests that have no care for our being and for our humanity. So we have to imagine this different world. And in imagining this different world, we then can create a future for ourselves. This is why I think the Caribbean must go,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the will, right? And if you want to see will demonstrated, all you have to do is look at the Jamaican track team and what it has done in the world in the last 20 years,
mm-hmm.
if not more.
Yes.
You understand?
Mm-hmm.
The will to succeed,
mm-hmm.
right? One of the poorest countries in the world, right, has produced some of the best athletes in the world. Mm-hmm. That doesn't just take just physical attributes. It took will. And so this is an example of how we can create a world that is better and a world that in where we can triumph, right, with some degree of humanity. That's what I would say.
Yes, and I add to that to say, you talk about the track, and I'll add to that Rastafari, which was
exactly.
which remains the only indigenous response to oppression and slavery and ongoing colonization in the region, coming out of the belly of Jamaica, and so we put that there. But and then also reggae music, and I'm saying this to say that I am agreeing with the point you're making, that we do have the will, we can make the difference, and sometimes we are overthinking it because this is politics, and how do you do this? But Rastafari was a response to oppression and continues to be a response to oppression. Maybe what it needs and what it should take is a return to the Rastafari philosophies, to look again at how we stood up against imperialism, ongoing colonialism, and oppression. This is just my 2 cents throwing in there to back what you just said, Brother Akko. But yes, go ahead.
You are so correct. I'll give you an example of the power of Rastafarianism in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I am a vegetarian today because of Rastafarianism in the Caribbean.
Well, there you go.
Because when the Rastas began to talk about ital and no salt in your food and all of these kinds of things, a lot of us began to do concrete research, and it made sense.
Yes.
Now, it may have been a mythological concept, who knows, coming from people who live, whose lived experiences told them certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But it matched the science that if you don't eat copious amount of salt and certain kinds of food, you are going to be healthy.
Yes.
And that has permeated so the Rasta movement has done more for healthy the Caribbean, and all the ministries of health combined throughout the entire Caribbean. And as we are moving away from those indigenous philosophies, you are seeing what is happening: diabetes, high blood pressure. We have the highest concentration of high blood pressure in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Compared, I think us and African Americans have, and we are a resistant type of high blood pressure,
mm-hmm.
according to research done.
Yeah.
Right, that the medicines don't work on us. And so what Rastafarianism taught us is that if we move to an indigenous philosophy and indigenous approaches to living, it can transform modern life into comfortable realities.
And there you go. And I want to end it on that note, because I think we have answers. We have answers if we go all the way back and forward to the continent of Africa, and we have answers from the belly of we the people. And it's what I think it takes is for us to look again at ourselves, because it is within us that the answers are.
Absolutely, Sister Kabu, and that word you just used there. I think we have a couple minutes. It's a term Cheryl James used in an interview or discussion. Somebody alluded that, well, we behave a certain way because we lost everything, and Cheryl corrected the person said, no, we came with ourselves.
That's right.
You understand? He said we came with ourselves, and therefore we had ourselves, and we still have ourselves. It is just that it is confused and conflicted by narratives meant to entrap us. And so we have to return to selfhood, to ourselves, to a philosophy based on humanity, right? An ideological base that is based on man and woman.
Brother Akko Mutota, thank you so much. I know we're going to talk to you. I know you have a program today, later on today. Is the program on today?
No, the sister is out of the country, so we rescheduled.
So I'm very happy that you could join us. As you know, we're going to be speaking with Brother Isaac Seni right after this. And throughout the morning, this is the issue we're looking at, but we're also going to be looking at the Horn of Africa, because, everything is connected. And what we see...
Everything is connected.
Yeah. So Isaac Seni is a Black Studies and Cuba specialist and coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies program at Dalhousie University. He holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His teaching, research, and scholarship encompass Cuba, Africa, the Caribbean, Black Canadian history, the global Black liberation struggle, and reparations. A major area of his research is Cuba's relationship with Africa. And we'll tell you more about him as the morning goes on. Professor Isaac Saini is joining me on the phone lines right now. Brother Isaac, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us inside of the Africa Forum.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me.
All right. Really appreciate
Pleasure to be here.
Really appreciate you coming on. First, let me just get your initial reaction, because we are looking at the attack on Venezuela. We're looking at the responses, but we want to contextualize this in the historical context. Before that, though, your initial response to what is transpiring right now in the Caribbean waters.
Yeah. Well, I think many of us anticipated there would be an attack because the U.S. had, they had the largest aircraft carrier there, the Gerald Ford, and, they deployed all of these troops, and it was costing them $18 million U.S. today, at least conservatively, to maintain it there, right? But also it's important in the sense that, the Trump had, basically promulgated or issued their national security strategy, which declared that they had, in a sense, U.S. imperialism had neglected the Americas, and they were going to reestablish their control over the entire region. And so many people have written about and talked about the Monroe Doctrine, was established in the 1820s, where the U.S. basically said that the Americas were basically going to be its exclusive sphere of influence, okay, and nobody else was going to be allowed in there. And of course, today, the U.S. is very angry, upset over the extent Chinese investment, for example, in Latin America and the Caribbean. But there's also the idea of manifest destiny, which is this white supremacist vision, right, of who should direct and control affairs in the region. And so, in a sense, there's a lot of continuity, and there's a lot of, shall we say, new degeneracy here in terms of the level of destruction and so forth. I don't think I need to tell your listeners or anyone, or even you, the litany, the numerous interventions that the United States has carried on in the region in the 20th century, for example, beginning with the seizing of Puerto Rico and Cuba in the 1890s. We can even go up to the Grenadier Revolution, what happened in Guatemala in 1954 and so forth. So the U.S. has frequently intervened in the region. We've been referred to as the American backyard. The idea is that in a sense that this region should always be controlled by the United States. And in the context of this early 21st century, where the U.S. is in economic decline, it's still the most powerful imperial country because of its military might, but it's an economic decline. There was a feeling that, what is necessary for the United States to be able to maintain its hegemony and its global dominance is it needs to retrench itself in the Americas. And so there was a feeling that was articulated in the Trump administration that the Latin America and the Caribbean had, in a sense, been neglected, right? And what had happened was that various geopolitical rivals had begun to find some footholds there, and the U.S. needed to reassert its hegemony as well. And it's also important to understand the U.S. will not stand any kind of independence, right, of any Caribbean and Latin American country. It's an anathema to them. Okay, it must be crushed, it must be negated. And in that context, we can look at what happened with the Haitian Revolution, when we have, enslaved Africans, right, rising up, right, establishing the first Black Republic, right, stunning the imperial powers that be, who might have been at each other's throats, but were united in trying to crush out this example of African freedom, this example of anti-colonial, right, national liberation. And so, as we all know, Haiti was diplomatically and economically isolated, right, and crucified. And then we see sort of like a parallel between what happened to the Haitian Revolution and what the U.S. has attempted to impose on Cuba. A reflection of that siege that was imposed as well. So any any form of independence, any form of self-determination that challenges U.S. hegemony always faces extreme pressures from the United States, imperialist aggression, from economic sanctions to outright invasion. And we see in the case of Venezuela here what has unfolded. People familiar when Chavez came to power, the attempt to use the resources of Venezuela to the benefit of the Venezuelan people. The kind of social programs that were funded in Venezuela and so on. And then Venezuela also began, like Cuba had projected with its internationalism. Venezuela had the economic wherewithal to actually do a significant amount of economic internationalism, so to speak, with Petrocaribe and so forth. So these things had to be snuffed out. So in a sense, the U.S. is just retrenching itself. It wants to be the global hegemon on the world scale. It also, in many ways, is looking to acquire those resources. It's no coincidence that places like Venezuela sit on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, right? We see the attacks on Nigeria, right? Okay, yes. Nigeria also with its oil reserves and its gold and its resources and so forth. And of course, we see, with the genocide in Gaza, there's all sorts of gas offshore of Gaza. But when we look at the genocide and the horrors unfolding in the Sudan and the Congo, I have the resources that exist in those African countries, in the African continent as a whole, sort of really provides a simple explanation for why the U.S. is determined to undermine, and not only in Latin America, but across the world, any government, any attempt to challenge those imperial control and so forth. And so Venezuela, it was a shock. It was horrible to see the kidnapping of the president, but it's also a horrible violation of international law. And I could go on and on. I don't want to belabor the point.
You have touched on international law, which let's go there, because as you talk about violations, help us to understand what are the violations of international law?
Well, the violations of international is fundamentally the sovereignty of nations. Okay, and it's important to understand that as limited as international law was, right, and in fact as Eurocentric as it was, as it emerged, it came out of the Second World War. It came out after that tremendous bloodletting and destruction, right, and so the idea was they would establish international laws and norms that would make these kind of vicious attacks, beyond the pale. For example, seizing the resources of another country, right? Okay, annexation of territorial expansion through annexation of other countries' territory and so forth. And then when the great anti-colonial national liberation struggles emerged in Latin America and Africa and elsewhere, international law was expanded by the movements of the global South to include fundamental ideas like right of self-determination and stuff, for example, of right to development. All of that has been thrown, in a sense, into the garbage, right? And in fact, the idea that might makes right was supposed to have been buried. The idea that force was the primary means by which you settle international disputes was supposed to be buried. We have now returned to a time when might makes right, when all that matters is imperial power, right? And that issues of self-determination and sovereignty are gone. And so the U.S. can just, and Trump can just say quite clearly, I will seize the resources of other countries, right? Because, we need it. And, of course, it's important to understand that when he's saying we, there's this attempt to create this idea that he represents the entirety of the nation or the country of the United States, the citizens. But it's really this clique of the financial oligarchy that wishes to enrich itself. So, so Venezuela made it very clear that they wanted, even up before the kidnapping of Maduro, that they wanted the oil, right? Okay, and that they were going to take this oil, and we were going to take our oil back, is what he actually said, right? Because Venezuela, under international law, had actually, nationalized and compensated the U.S. companies, but nationalized those resources, right? To better actually, in a sense, have control over those resources so they could benefit, its nations and so forth. And of course, he's now said, not only will they've got rid of Maduro, he's basically said, I don't know how they're going to do it. They have to put boots on the ground, that they will control Venezuela, directly administer it. He's going to bring in all of these U.S. companies into the oil industry in Venezuela and therefore seize the resources. And then, of course, your listeners are probably very well aware that he's turned his sights on Greenland, right? Yes. Greenland, which has all of these minerals, and Denmark itself has declared now apparently that they consider U.S. to be a national security threat, right? And of course, we see this right across. And the global south, where those countries that have these minerals, right? Okay, that are central to Western imperialism, particularly to U.S. imperial power. Those countries are in threat of being directly intervened in by the United States if they don't follow the diktat of Washington. And of course, your listeners, I'm sure, are well aware historically that if you go back to the early 60s, right? Yes. We think of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. That was the great crime he made. Was the idea of actually achieving Congo's independence and attempting to use its vast minerals, right? Just even the idea of using its vast minerals for the benefit of its people, right, was something that was completely unacceptable to them. And so international law, and when I was in law school, and I remember I focused on international law, I had a professor who believed deeply in these principles, right? Yes. Okay, and so, but we don't have the rule of law anymore, right? It's terrifying, and for countries such as the Caribbean, who are often dismissed as microstates, right? Yes. Okay, however symbolic international law may have been, it was a very important shield for small countries that have very little power and often fall prey to imperial powers, which is why so many of us have been, in a sense, very disconcerted, upset by the fact that, Trinidad and Tobago at one stage openly and enthusiastically sort of embraced, the increased U.S. aggressions and imperial presence that was emerging in the region and so forth. What happens to the dream of Caribbean unity, right? Are we not better to working together, cooperating together, collaborating together as the Caribbean in order to make our way in what is an increasingly dangerous world?
But I hear you saying, and you've also written about this, that and you've posed the question as to whether the dream of one Caribbean is ending or being renewed. From an anti-colonial standpoint, is CARICOM structurally capable of resisting this imperial power, or was it always designed to manage dependency and to try to overcome it?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and that's a debate and a discussion I've had with many of my friends. We felt that CARICOM, but obviously almost all of the Caribbean governments have been top down, right? Instead of empowering the masses, right? Instead of basically not only involving them in participatory decision making, right, but unleashing the profound creativity that they have. And so CARICOM itself tended to be, quite slow, technocratic, elitist, and so forth, right? And focused on, states as opposed to directly empowering people. But the fact that it exists itself, right, is important in of itself. The question is whether it can be renewed in today's conditions. It's a profound question, and that's why I think we need to have a revival of the progressive movements in the Caribbean, right, to push these governments, if not in order to establish, hopefully, progressive governments, right, governments that can reflect the aspirations of the people. And I know I'm not really giving you a concrete answer, right? And so what? There's some people who would actually argue, and I think they'd make a very strong point, that we have to return to radical traditions, right? Where ultimately, we have to establish people-centered societies, not centered around capital and so forth. Can CARICOM be an instrument? Can it be renewed? Or is it too stuck in the mud? Is another question, right? Okay. But, it's interesting that, CARICOM itself has been seen as an obstacle, right? To these plans the United States has, right? Like, for example, we have critiques, right, of the African Union, right? Okay? And people have lots of criticisms of the African Union, that it was a compromise when it was created. It was, in a sense, really didn't really deeply organizationally embody the Pan-African ideas because it rooted power in all of these individual states, right? But even the existence of the African Union is seen as something that either must be undermined, if not completely negated, by the United States. So any example of independence, right, however small it might be, is unacceptable for the imperial powers. And I'm hoping, and this is one of the points I made in the article that was published, right, is I made the point that you have even our elites, which tend to be comprador elites, right? And they're under tremendous pressures, right? I mean, I know these governments are under tremendous pressures, economically, diplomatically, questions of taking away visas. So many people in Caribbean islands have visas and relatives have visas and also have relatives, right, in the United States that would like to visit and get worried about being cut off from them. So I understand the immense pressures, but there's some of them who believe that by kowtowing to the United States, okay, that somehow this gives them proximity to power and therefore power. As if the United States, as if Trump, in this new level of degeneracy of U.S. imperialism, would care less about the Caribbean, care less about people he considers not to be inferior, if not really truly human, right? I mean, the kind of white supremacist ideology that comes out of the United States, right? Plus its imperial and capitalist drive for profit and to dominate resources makes it.
But Brother Isaac, let me take a quick break because I want to come back to look at ask you to put on your history, Professor Hart, for a minute to talk about the extent to which this time in the Caribbean resembles, if you will, the 1930s or not. Let me take a quick break. Brother Isaac, I'm just looking and reading again the Monroe Doctrine and the Manifest Destiny and all of what we see happening around us with the Horn of Africa and everything else, Ukraine, you name it, all of this, Russia, the whole thing. I've been forced to go back to read my history book on the 1930s and what the conditions were like that led up to Japan's invasion of Manchuria and Italy's invasion of Ethiopia that ultimately led to World War II. Put on your history hat for me, please, and talk to us about how the parallels that we're witnessing, if any.
I mean, and that's a common thing. People are saying we're returning to pre-World War II conditions with all of these contradictions, right? Yes. And so forth. And, I'm very happy you mentioned that when people normally think of World War II, they always talk about the German invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, but the invasion of Manchuria, okay, by, as you pointed out, by Japan, right? And, leading to the horrible loss of death, we could call it the Chinese Holocaust, right? And the Japanese visited upon the Chinese, and the invasion of Ethiopia, right, in 35. These were precursors, right? Because it began in the global south, right? And so what we see, as we see these geopolitical rivalries emerge, is, we find that now the global south becomes a space, right, where before there were the ideas that, and after the Second World War, that colonization and direct control of these countries, right, was completely unacceptable. We seem to be returning to that phase, right? Trump, as I said, in terms of Venezuela, is openly talking about directly administering Venezuela as a state and directly controlling its resources. So it's very dangerous in that sense, right? And what happens is that, we don't have these international treaties that emerged after the Second World War, from the Geneva Conventions to, the Convention on Genocide and the United Nations Charter. So all of that has been thrown to the ground. And we're now back into imperial rivalries, right? And I think that's where we're at right now. We have different blocs have emerged. Okay, and we have the United States. I mean, the difference, of course, is the U.S., at the time wasn't the global hegemon, right? The U.S. is now, is the global hegemon in decline. Its share of the global economy has been shrinking, and there's been this fear that was articulated, I would argue, since the early 2000s. We have the Project for the New American Century. We talked about how to restore U.S. domination. So I think when we look at what's the 30s, I think it provides a very good historical analogy, right? We had, the global south, the number of independent countries didn't exist. Africa was still under, 90% of it was still under European control, right? And so forth. And if we take into consideration once Ethiopia had been occupied, right, by Italy, it's more than 90%. The Caribbean was still colonized as well. We had massive colonies, divided between Britain, France, and Holland in Asia as well, right? So, in a sense, it seems that the goal is not only to eviscerate international law, right, and shatter these ideas of sovereignty and right of self-determination, but in a sense to return the global south to subjugation. At least that's the vision of that's clearly and openly articulated by Donald Trump and so on. But also, the last point I'd like to make is also the 30s, and we know in the Caribbean, right, the 30s was also a time of the rebirth of nationalism, or the rebirth of the ideas of independence, right? Okay. Yes. We have worker struggles, right? And national struggles throughout the Caribbean, right? I mean, and when I think of Trinidad, right? And the Baptist uprisings, right? Okay. Well, not to call it the Baptist, but, the workers' uprisings and so forth, and the suppression of the Southern Baptists, for example, right? Yeah. We have all of these things. So we have that happening as well. Now, the question is, will we have a rebirth of that in our time? And, I was looking before we got, I joined the conversation. Yes. And I was looking at a WhatsApp group of that's based in the Caribbean, right, of colleagues of mine and progressives of mine who were talking about, where does the new resurgence of independence come from, or progressive movements come from, right? Okay. We had people who were organizing in the 30s and so forth. So there's one. So I think in a sense, that's what we have to look for, the rekindling, right, as in the 30s, of these ideas of independence, the intellectuals who came out, right, and were speaking. He mentioned C.L.R. James was mentioned by a brother Akko in the earlier interview, right? Yes. We have others who were talking, George Padmore I can mention, right? Okay. We had people who were trade union activists, people who talked about independence, people who were Pan-Africanists, right? Who were very rooted in the communities organizing. We're waiting for that new generation to emerge as well. But the last point I'd make, I think you're quite right. It's a very dangerous situation. The 1930s was a time of lawlessness, right? Okay. But despite the League of Nations, right, which was completely powerless, right? Okay, like the United Nations seems now, to stop these aggressions, right? What eventually happened was the 30s exploded into World War II, the most destructive world conflict ever, okay, that, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, millions, hundreds of millions, tens of millions of lives across the world, right? And people tend to think of Europe and so forth, where many of the major battles were fought. But we tend to forget that, the Caribbean was drawn into it. Africa was drawn into it in terms of resources, in terms of providing manpower and so forth. And, when I think of the historical parallels, and I think particularly of Trinidad and Tobago, where bases being established in Trinidad, particularly the radar station in Tobago, when I think of Marines being deployed in Trinidad and Tobago and so forth, it kind of reminds me of what was happening in the 1930s. I mean, in World War I in Trinidad and Tobago, because Trinidad had the largest refinery at that time during World War II in the British Empire, and so it was an extremely important strategic location, right? And so forth. In fact, people often point out, and it seems that most of the U-boats that was sunk, the German submarines that were sunk during World War II, most of them were sunk off in an area of the Trinidad and Tobago, not too far. So one of the problems is that, when war breaks out, when these conflicts break out, smaller countries from the global south are drawn in and so forth. And as we know, there is no concern for lives of people from the global south, much less for people of African descent. Yes.
You mentioned just now the League of Nations and the United Nations. And do you see parallels there too? The League, of course, coming out of World War I, it should never happen again. Yeah. Died with the Emperor's speech to them, today for you, tomorrow for me. It was much more that today for me, tomorrow for you. It's much more than that, obviously. Yeah. But here we are now. The UN says it's going to meet tomorrow. The Security Council is going to meet tomorrow. But is it facing its League of Nations moment?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, one of the things about the League of Nations, one of the things that really, in a sense, doomed it, right, was the fact that the United States never joined it, right? And therefore, in a sense, we have Trump in today's conditions, withdrawing and delegitimizing the United Nations. So the U.S. has withdrawn from very important United Nations agencies such as UNESCO and so forth. And, and so the United Nations is at its historical moment. I have friends who are international lawyers, right, who work in the United Nations, who believe that international law, right, they believe firmly in these principles, is dead, right, and that somehow the United Nations has now become irrelevant, right, because it's been unable to stop the genocide in Gaza. It can't stop the genocide in the Sudan and Congo, and these have been going on for for such a long period of time, right. It can issue resolutions condemning U.S. aggression against Venezuela, for example, that may come out. I mean, it's actually been since 1992 an annual resolution that's been voted on the United Nations condemning overwhelmingly the U.S. economic war against Cuba. And yet the U.S. economic war against Cuba continues, besieging the island and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. So there have always been questions about the efficacy of the United Nations. But those principles in international law of self-determination, of sovereignty, of, the fact that you can't, that might does not make right, okay? Mm-hmm. That you can't go in and seize openly the resources of another country, right? Okay? Mm-hmm. Those principles, however, they may have remained just as principles, and however they may have been subverted in a sense since the Second World War, are very important. And what the U.S. is doing now, in fact, it used to hide its interventions. It used to hide, behind, covert operations. Like, for example, when we think of what happened with Guatemala in 1954, the overthrow of Arbenz, when we see what happened in Chile in 1973. Now, all this stuff is all open. Okay, yes. They make no bones about it. It's blatant, it's flagrant, it's brazen, and they articulate it as their fundamental right. Mm-hmm. So the United States at one point used to intervene and say, we're not doing this for resources, we're doing this for higher things, right? Trump is just, taking the mask off, the monster, and makes it very clear this is what we're doing for. We're seizing those resources, and we don't think you have any rights. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's important to understand that, this foreign aggression of the United States in its foreign policy of violence, right, of imperial aggression, also must be seen as part and parcel of what's going on inside the United States itself. The rolling back of the civil rights gains, right? The targeting of communities of color, right? The huge austerity that's unfolding in the United States as well. And I know a lot of people, tend to think, they cherish their visas to go to the United States, and they think of the United States as the land of hope and opportunity, of milk and honey and so forth. But things are very tough in the United States, okay, in terms of all of the kind of cutbacks and so forth that are unfolding, and the assault on what we would consider basic rights and so on, right? So I think those things are connected, and Martin Luther King himself, in his famous Beyond Vietnam speech, when he gave in Riverside Church in Harlem, in New York, in April of 1967, spoke about this violence in Vietnam. He spoke about what's connected to the kind of domestic, social and economic violence within the United States itself. So we're in a very dangerous situation. And I remember posting yesterday after the invasion that I look with tremendous apprehension to what's unfolding in the world. Quite concerned about what's happening, because does international law exist anymore? Does might make right? Is that just the most important principle that exists now? And, but at the end of the day, history has shown that, we have instances, and we have tremendous examples, as you were pointing out in the discussion about Akko, of oppressed and exploited people challenging this and keeping the dream of a better world alive.
Hold the line for me, please. Brother Isaac, let me take a quick break.
You get chopped? Not take that. Make Mocha FIB and the police help you. Call 311 or 1-888-662-2847. The time by the FID, Mocha and the JCF is...
Now, a minute going up to 8 o'clock. You're inside of the Africa Forum. We're having very insightful discussion, a conversation with Brother Isaac Seni. Brother Seni, Cuba was threatened. Cuba's always been under threat, but we heard in the press conference yesterday, where Cuba was openly threatened by Marco Rubio and them. And then we also heard, and I want you to talk about these two things, where the President of the United States talk about, we will run Venezuela. What's your thinking on all of, on first of all, the running of Venezuela, and then to say this open threat against Cuba? What does that mean in the wider scheme of things?
Well, he said we're going to run Venezuela openly. It's like he's going to be, him. He's going to be running them himself. With people like Hegseth, right? The Secretary of War, and of course Rubio, right? The point is this: they don't actually control Venezuela at the moment. They have to put boots on the ground, right? Okay, and we know it took over 500,000 troops in Iraq, and Venezuela is one much larger, is larger than Iraq, has a larger population, much more organized. It hasn't been like when they invaded Iraq in 2003. Iraq had been basically, shall we say, handicapped, when we use that term, by over 10 years of sanctions. Okay, so they're going to, and also, the geography of Venezuela is much different, right? There's the jungle areas, there's the mountainous areas, and so forth, and there is an organized core of Chavistas, right? Okay, a significant, large population, right, of people, right, who basically made gains from the Bolivarian revolution and measures, but more importantly, are Chavistas, right? Believe deeply in independence, and we've seen people go out into the streets. There are mass demonstrations that have taken place in Venezuela against the intervention, right? Okay, and in fact trying to defend the gains that they've had, right? And it's interesting that one of the things that he also said was that Machado, who had won the Peace Prize, I don't know what the Peace Prize means, if you can give it to her, right?
Peace Prize for war.
For war, right?
Yes.
That, she was there and, she had been in the election and she lost, and now he says she doesn't have enough support, she's not popular, right? So what does that say about what does that say about the fact that, basically speaking, they can administer the country? They're going to have to put boots on the ground, right?
Yes.
And that requires getting, really for the... in really getting the American public, right, to buy into this. Now, the polls in the United States show that the overwhelming majority of U.S. citizens, right, of the U.S. population opposes, right, this war in Venezuela, right? Precisely because, Trump, the MAGA base, has he had run on the idea that America first. So I think the question is this: where is he going to get troops? Where is he going to get troops to occupy Venezuela, to administer it? Where is he going to get troops for Grenada? Not Grenada, for Greenland, sorry. Okay, where is he going to get troops for Nigeria, right? Because he's talking about all of these adventures. And talking with some people, is he going to have to bring back the draft? If he brings back the draft, right, we all remember what happened in the 1960s in the United States, right? So there will be mass opposition to that. And of course, it's different than the 60s because in the time of the 60s, the U.S. was in an upward economic curve, right? The economy was still growing. The U.S. was the unchallenged economic titan of the world, right? Right now, the U.S. economy is in crisis, right? There's all sorts of layoffs taking place, right? People are involved in 1, 2, 3, 4 different jobs, right? What they call the gig economy and so forth. So I don't know what he says, and he could administer the economy, but it's an outright statement that basically that his belief and the belief of the U.S. Financial oligarchy is that the resources of the region, right? Okay. Belong to the U.S. oligarchy, right? The financial oligarchy, right? Yes. And the people who live on those countries are just inconveniences, right? Okay? At best, to be pawns to facilitate the exploitation of those resources, and it was to be completely swept aside, right? And so forth. But I think it's enraged a lot of people, and this kind of rhetoric, right, sort of demonstrates to them how much a danger U.S. imperialism and particularly the Trump regime represents at this particular time. And when it comes to Cuba, in that sense, there was the articulation by people like Rubio, right, who's really the architect of this whole Latin America first plan, right, that the road to Cuba, to Havana, runs through Caracas, right, okay, that there was this very strong connection between Venezuela and Cuba since the emergence of Chavez, his assumption of power, economic, diplomatic, and otherwise, and that by cutting off any connections to Venezuela, the Cuban Revolution would collapse. And it's important to understand that for over 65 years, the United States has waged an unrelenting campaign of economics, strangulation and destabilization against the Cuban Revolution, because it represented, it comes out in U.S. documents. You can see these ideas expressed in the early 60s, that Cuba represented the unforgivable revolution, the unforgivable example that a nation could actually, take command of its destiny and use its own resources, however limited they might be, for the benefit of its people. And that actually came out when you read some of these documents where people, were early on in the Kennedy administration, you have a whole campaign of economic destabilization, psychological campaigns, assassination campaigns, and so forth. And so for 65 years, Cuba has resisted, right? Okay? And for your listeners, I think it would be good for them to actually Google what's called a Mallory memorandum. And this is a memorandum that was now declassified in 1960 by Lester Mallory, who was in the U.S. Department of State, and who writes this memorandum acknowledging that the Cuban government has majority support and therefore it's very strong. And the only way the United States can destroy it is to deprive it, okay, of all of the things it needs, economically isolated, so the people starve to death, and therefore this will provoke an internal uprising. And so this has formed sort of like the framework, right, for the U.S. war against Cuba, and it's only intensified it. Trump actually added an additional 240 economic sanctions when he was in his first term in office against Cuba, directly targeting its energy. So the goal is to strangle Cuba. And I should make a point here as well, and I always like to make this because I've always forgotten that, there's this whole debate. Cuba's in an economic crisis, right? Cuba's economic problems, the result of Cuba's policies, right? Mistakes by the government. Socialism is always going to fail and can't run an economy, right? Or is it a result of the U.S. economic sanctions, right? And I always like to point out, well, we actually have a test case for this, because when Obama, whatever our criticisms of Obama, right? But when Obama was forced, because of pressure from Latin American countries, to lessen the sanctions against Cuba, and that began really officially announced on December the 17th, 2014, right? For those 2 years until Trump assumed the presidency, Cuba was economically flourishing, and Cuba hadn't changed its economic policies. Its revolutionary government still remained in place. So I think that 2 years provides some sort of very powerful insight into what is actually the cause of the U.S. economic problems. It's the U.S. economic siege, right? And their goal is to destroy Cuba as an example of independence, okay, so that in a sense, basically speaking, the dream of independence and self-determination for the Latin American and the Caribbean can finally, in their eyes, be extinguished and so forth. So I think that's one of the things we're speaking about. But it's also important to bear in mind that as they've threatened Cuba, and, Rubio said, if I was the Cuban president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, I'd be very worried, as if they're planning to actually swoop in and grab him. They also threatened Mexico.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And he threatened Mexico. Is he going to invade Mexico? Right. So he's talking about, as I said, he's going to. He said this. It's a fantasy. I'm going to directly administer and control Venezuela. But you have to actually make that the reality. So you have to deploy troops on the ground. You have to crush the resistance in Venezuela. You have to seize those resources and so forth. So he wants to do that. He wants to actually go after Colombia, because he's also described Petro as a problem. Right. Okay. He wants to go after Mexico. He wants to go after Cuba. They're carrying on this activity against Nigeria. He wants to seize Greenland. So where is he going to get the manpower, right, to put groups on the ground? As I said before, are they going to have to implement another draft? And when they did the draft was one of the prime movers, right, for moving in the 60s, middle-class white Americans in opposition to Vietnam War, right? Okay. And because, many of these people, they had their careers interrupted, right? Okay. So and we know that disproportionately people of African descent in the United States, and people from Latin American descent were represented in the army fighting in Vietnam, and therefore suffered the deaths and the casualties, right? Yes. Is he going to be able to do that again? Okay, so these are some of the key questions I think that are going to emerge, right? Is this a question of U.S. imperialist overstretch rather, right? I don't know, right? The problem for us is obviously, we can talk about this analytically, right? Okay, what are the limits of U.S. imperialism? Is there going to be the law of unintended consequences, right? Is this going to, shall we say, fly back in the face of U.S. imperialism? But the sad part is, while all this is going on, people's lives are being destroyed. People are being killed. There's at least 40 people who died in this incursion to seize Maduro, right? And all of these various attacks. They even bombed the mausoleum where Chavez's body is buried, right? It's a museum, right? It's a mausoleum. It's where people go to visit. It's not a military target. They bombed it, obviously to destroy any sort of cultural memory, right? Okay? And symbols of socialism and revolution, okay? But more importantly, they killed a janitor who was working there. Okay, so this is the fear I have, that we may be able, I don't know, stop this imperial, behemoth, right? But it's going to cost tremendous amounts of lives.
And that's the bottom line. And the fear, I think, Brother Akka spoke earlier about the fear, which is real among leaders also, because in the Caribbean, we have in Jamaica, CARICOM, we're hearing discussions of pragmatism. And I think you've asked, was it your article where you also raised the point of where does pragmatism end and sovereignty begins?
Yeah. Where does it begin? And and if they build, there's Kissinger who said the U.S. doesn't have friends; it has interests, right? It has tools, right? Okay, and once you no longer serve U.S. interests, you're tossed aside. Okay, and so they're trying to find some sort of way to live with U.S. imperialism, but the U.S. imperialism, particularly in this iteration under Trump, requires utter and complete subordination, right? and so on. And I'm actually, what's interesting, I'm speaking to you from Canada, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. On the, right next door to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happens is that, if Canadians are worried, if we could do that, these resources, Canada sits on the 4th largest proven oil reserves, much less the largest freshwater reserves in the world, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, a whole series of resources. And he's already begun to use the same argument. Like he declared, in 2020, that's when he declared that Maduro was a narco-terrorist. Then he declared, in 2025 that fentanyl was a weapon of mass destruction, right? Okay, and so on, right? Even though we know no fentanyl comes to the United States from Venezuela and from so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. And he's also declared Canada to be a significant source of fentanyl, while very little fentanyl comes in to the United States from Canada. So it's creating the pretext, and even Canadians here are worried, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a colonial settler state, right? Dispossessed and exterminated a significant portion of the indigenous population. It has a history of slavery, which people may be surprised at, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. It's committed to the settler colonial project and to the imperial project the United States has embarked on, and to white supremacy and all of these different things we can say. But even this state now begins to wonder if it's under threat and so forth. So there's all of this insecurity and fear, even among the leadership here, I think, right, of where this is going, much less when we think of the Caribbean islands, right? So that's why I hope that, in a sense, this will lead to people realizing we need to have some Caribbean unity, right? And in a sense, we need to understand that we need to pry ourselves off from the United States to develop our own independent relationships with other parts of the world. I know there was a lot of talk, for the last few years of the BRICS, right? Mm-hmm. Of the rise of a new geopolitical and economic poles of power, right? And the U.S. is determined not to allow that to happen, right? And it's determined to use what it has in terms of overwhelming superiority over the rest of the world, which is its military might and so forth. So it's a really frightening time.
It is, yeah.
It's a really frightening time. And the fact that, they were blowing up these boats and violating international law, that is tearing up the U.S. Constitution, demonstrates how dangerous things are.
And as you talk about BRICS, just before we go into the break, let me wrap up because the break is a bit long. So I'll continue with the discussion and wrap with you before I take that break. But one of the things I think that you've also talked about, it includes the global negotiations, example with China, and talk about you've written about the fragmentation and how this will make it harder for the Caribbean. I think you're posing the question to negotiate collectively with external powers like China. So let's bring into the discussion the question of China and Russia and Iran and the significance of while the strike on Venezuela was happening, it is quite likely that a high-level diplomat from China was meeting with Maduro or had met with Maduro earlier in the day.
Yeah, some people were saying this was a direct message to China, right? Okay. I mean, think of it, mistakes happen in war all the time, incompetence. They could have killed them, right? I mean, there was a time when they hit the Chinese embassy when they were bombing Serbia at one point, right? Yes. During that war. So it was a direct message to China, right? And in fact, it's interesting, and people are arguing. There's a whole debate, like Trump's national security strategy. I mean, every government, every administration releases a national security strategy, right? And normally it's only very few people who read it, who are specialists. His strategy that was released, right? Okay, with the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, that is probably the most perused national security strategy of all, right? Okay, and in it, many people were discussing, well, this is an America's first thing, right? Okay, he's going to focus on the Americas, and it's basically, this idea that he believes in a world of spheres or tripolar, right? There are other people who say, well, no, before they further retrench their global dominance, right? They have to retrench their backyard and so forth, right? So we have all of these different things going on. But but what's interesting is, as they were talking about America first, he was sending, one of the largest, I think, may have been the largest shipment of military weapons, right, to Taiwan. Okay, was sent, and that precipitated the Chinese military exercises and so forth, right? So the issue is this: I think what this really is about is that the U.S. they need these resources, right? Okay, you have people like Musk and so forth, and you have the AI, right? There's a lot of people, what they call the Silicon Brothers, or the Silicon Bros, as they like to call them, right? Who are driving AI. It requires a tremendous amount of energy, i.e., you need all of this petroleum, okay, and you need all of these resources like lithium and a whole number of other different things. And a lot of that is not located. I mean, yes, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves, right? But you also they don't have the lithium. you have it in Africa, right? Okay, and so and the U.S. is a global empire that with investments entangled everywhere, right? So the fact that they can just simply retreat into the Americas, right? Okay, when it's an octopus all over the world, I think might be wishful thinking, and so in a sense, it's a clear message to China, right? And it's important, important point to make here that it was under Obama that in the national security strategy that they officially advocated a pivot to Asia, right? Where they officially acknowledged that China was the major challenge to U.S. imperial power, right? Yes. And then under Biden, it was Blinken, who was Secretary of State, who declared Latin America as a front line of struggle against China, right? So there is a uniqueness to the Trump strategy, if we may use the word strategy, but there's also continuity as well in terms of U.S. imperial aggression, right, and so forth, and the imperialist interest and so forth. So, I mean, in fact, there were people both in the first Trump regime term, and then in the Biden regime term, who spoke about, a coming war with China, right? That it was inevitably going to be a conflict with China, right? And those of us who study the history of economics and between rivals and so forth, particularly in capitalism, right? These conflicts are inevitable. It's inevitable in a system based on private profit and based on the nation state. These conflicts, whatever people may intend, are inevitable, right? Like Trump may have actually believed, and sincerely, I'm not in his mind, okay? Because he said we're not going to get involved in foreign wars. We're not going to get involved in these entanglements. He said that, right? That was his mantra, and that was very attractive for his MAGA base, so to speak, right? What they wanted to focus on was the restructuring of the United States in a white supremacist way, to go back to what it was like, right, before people had civil rights and so on, right? Okay, but they also were against the foreign interventions because they saw that as not focused on the United States and also a drain on money, right? And Trump may have actually been sincere about that, but the actual logic and structure of U.S. imperialism requires these aggressions, right? Requires this expansion, right? And so he, in a sense, is a reflection of the structural contradictions of U.S. imperialism as it economically declines. Okay, I mean, it's when you look at the share of how its share of the world economy and some other important economic factors, right, measurements and dimensions have declined, right, in the last quarter of a century, last 30, 40 years. It's quite striking and so forth. And so, in a sense, I think if we're going to end the danger of war, we need to abolish imperialism. We need to have different economic and political and social systems established in the world, okay, in which people are placed first and the interests of capital are placed secondary, if not at all, right?
If we go back to, if we look at, you mentioned the national security strategy that was published recently, and we heard Trump in the press conference. He talks about the Monroe Doctrine, and he says, now I hear people calling it the Monroe Doctrine, but I don't know about that. So this is where we are, and if it is to be taken seriously, then what does that mean for Sino-Caribbean relations or Sino-Latin American relations, if you will? Because this, I think, is a question to be asked and answered.
Well, perhaps, now, one of the things that's interesting, perhaps, we think, well, Cuba might be a good example for that. So when the United States intervened, right, in what the Cubans call the necessary war of independence, during the war of independence in the 1890s, right? And the U.S. intervened just as the Cubans were on the verge of victory and converted the island to a neo-colony. They imposed something called the Platt Amendment in the Cuban Constitution. So the U.S. occupied the island, told the Cubans that, we will not leave the island, so it actually had a gun to their head if you didn't accept this amendment into your constitution, named after Senator Oliver Platt. And the amendment allowed the United States to intervene in Cuba anytime it wished, right? And it also basically, and there are a number of things within it, right? It also basically said Cuba could not negotiate any sort of treaty with any other country unless the United States approved it, right? And Cuba actually at one point negotiated a treaty with Britain. There's actually a very good book written on this by a Cuban historian. Negotiated a treaty with Britain, right? Okay, and the U.S. stepped in and completely negated it, right? So the idea is that, in the sense that I don't think any of these nations, if Trump does succeed in imposing his hegemonic will, right? Okay, none of these nations will be allowed to negotiate any treaty with any other entity, okay, unless the U.S. approves it. Okay, and if the U.S. doesn't approve it, you'll face all sorts of sanctions and so forth.
So much has been invested already, though. So much has been invested.
Well, that's the issue, right? Okay. Will they just seize it, right? Will they just seize them, right? Yeah.
I'd like to hear what Jamaica in particular has to say about this, because Jamaica has a really close relationship, investment, economic relationship with China in particular. We have just about 2 minutes to go, Professor. So let me say, lessons to be learned. And you've been doing that throughout the program. But as I asked Brother Akko, where do we go from here? Chaos or community?
I think with one in the Caribbean, we have to revive the Caribbean dream. And really do the education among particularly young people, because obviously the future why pan-Caribbeanism is necessary, right? In a dangerous world, we have to basically organize among. I think it's going to come from the people. We have to actually democratize our societies in terms of including mass participation of the people, right? So one of the things, obviously, is that when I talk with friends, is that in the 80s and so forth, and the 70s and 80s, before the overthrow of the Grenadian Revolution, right, which happened in 83, there were progressive movements, right? There was a discourse, right? So I think the first step is to return to that discourse. I mean, obviously things are different in 2025, right? People have different interests, different preoccupations, but why Caribbean unity is necessary, and why we need to have greater participation, democratic participation of people in setting the course of their countries and so on. And I know that's a pretty vague answer, but I think that's where we have to begin. It has to come from the people. Yes. It has to be rooted in the people, and it has to be rooted in our unity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Professor Isaac Seni. Really appreciate
Thank you so much as well. Thank you for having me, and I wish you all the best. And I'm thinking of Jamaica, especially in the wake of the destruction of Hurricane Melissa, right?
Yes, we're rebuilding. Thank you so much, my brother. Look forward to talking to you soon. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, because this thing is fluid, even as we speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So we just heard from Professor Isaac Seni, and just to remind you of who the professor is, we did that at the beginning, but we didn't do it in between. So if you caught us in the middle of the conversation, you probably did get that. So he is a Black Studies and a Cuba specialist and coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies program at Dalhousie University. He holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London. His teaching, research and scholarship encompasses Cuba, Africa, the Caribbean, Black Canadian history, the global Black liberation struggle and reparations. His major area of research is Cuba's relationship with Africa. So much to talk to Professor Seni about later on. He was also the director of Dalhousie University's Transition Year Program, the groundbreaking program founded in 1970 to redress the educational barriers and injustices that confronted the Mi'kmaq Nation, other indigenous peoples in Canada, and the African Nova Scotia community. He's a longtime community activist and participant in the anti-war movement and the anti-racist struggle, and passionately believes in the collective power of the people to transform the world in ways that bring forth equality and human dignity. Melissa has devastated the homes and lives of many of our brothers and sisters here in Jamaica. We appeal to you to give generously to the IRFM 11 Coca Relief Drive. People in affected areas urgently need the following: rice, flour, sugar, cornmeal, non-perishable food items such as oats, crackers, etc., canned food, sardines, mackerel, and so on, tarpaulin, solar lights, battery or solar-powered radios, personal hygiene products are also welcomed. Drop your donations at IRFM at Coconut Grove here, Coconut Grove in Oterias, right here in St. Anne, or 1B Courtney Walsh Drive in Kingston. We'll get your donation to all those who need it. A small donation from you will make a big impact on somebody's life. The IRFM 11 Coca Relief Drive, getting Jamaica back on its feet quickly, making things Irish still. By the way, just to remind you, we do not need any more donation of clothing or water. Right? So we're okay with clothing and water now. Thank you. I have something to say, and I think I need to pull the music down to say it, because I am very concerned about the state of journalism in Jamaica. Extremely concerned. And I want to talk within the context of a particular story that has been making the rounds in every newsroom, every newspaper, every news outlet, picked up by social media, interestingly. And that is to say, Jamaica has experienced its lowest murder rate year 2025 for the last decade or something like that. Now, that by itself might be true, but it needs a critical analysis, because what is killing by the gun or the knife or a hammer or a cutlass, machete, is killing is a gun in the hand of a civilian who shoots another civilian. Killing? Because murder is a legal term. Is that considered killing the person? And a gun in the hand of a member of the JCF or security forces that is used to kill a civilian who has not been captured, caught, tried, convicted, and sentenced to be killed by gun by police. Is that killing? I know what the crime situation is like in Jamaica. I'm very much aware of it. In this space, we talk a lot about it. But the reporting has to be more nuanced than this. Because, I hear the Prime Minister saying that we should celebrate. It's something to celebrate. 600 and odd people dead now, killed in the year, and it's something to celebrate. We should not be celebrating anything like that. It is your job and our responsibility too to ensure that we have zero killing. So don't tell us that we must celebrate because 600 and odd people dead. I don't know if the Prime Minister recognizes that statement that he made says a lot about him. And I don't know if he's just, sometimes you're talking and you get carried away with something and then you say it and you want to pull it back, but you can't pull it back, and instead of pull it back, you go on and on about it. So don't tell us to celebrate. And maybe I'm saying this, I don't know, but, I cannot believe coming from a Prime Minister. The word he uses, celebrate. So Jamaica has one of the highest murder rate then, crime, killing in the world. It was second highest the last time we did check, right? And you have 600 and odd people being killed in a year. And that is down by how much percent? 40 odd percent or something like that. But it is still no reason to celebrate because it was so high that taking it down to 600 and odd people killed, or getting it down or it coming down to 600 and odd people killed, is nothing to celebrate. Do you know what 600 and odd people look like? Well, you try put on an event and see the 600 and odd people in the venue and say you don't feel happy. If you see 600 and odd people come, that's a whole heap of people. But beyond that, though, is that the year 2025 also saw one of the highest rate the amount of people killed in Jamaica, extrajudicial killing in Jamaica by the police. And so that number, 311, I think it is, must be added to the 600 odd. Why we separate them? And if you're going to call it murder, who determines the guilt or innocence of any Jamaican? And let me tell you something. I'm not going to have no conversation with nobody, because listen, here's why I'm even getting angry just hearing what a lot of people are saying, because you've already said this to me in many different ways over the years, which is to say the police have know the criminal. And so people are dead and criminal kill people, so police will kill them. But we have a situation in Jamaica of classism, racism, colorism. And our black boys especially are criminalized before you even know them name. You could have, and we have gradation, if you will, of coloring, colorism in Jamaica. So the browner you are, the most unlikely you are to commit a crime, even though you might be the wickedest one on the lot. And that is the reality of Jamaica. So our black boys, when we send them out of our house, them black skin, they are first criminalized before anything else. So that we know. All right. And this is why I say I'm concerned about the state of journalism. I don't know how you report that you have such a decrease in so-called murders in Jamaica, in killings in Jamaica, but yet you have 311 deaths. I think that's a number. Yeah, if I'm wrong, somebody tell me. I think that's a number. By the security forces. Last year alone. One year. That is the news. That is the news. And I challenge our newsrooms and our news editors to think critically. A decrease in the number of people dead that end up with that take you to 600 odd is not a headline news. The news is that in 1 year, the institution, organization, the place, the people entrusted with the job of protecting, of security, protection of the people, have killed in 1 year 311 of us. That is a massive headline. That is the news. That right there is the news. And I'm very shocked that I'm not hearing more from private sector, civil society, elites, oligarchs, name uno. I know that if civil society takes it on, they'll get a bashing, because that is how it works in Jamaica. When civil society take on police killing, as sooner, they get a bashing. But sometimes we have to feel the fear and do it anyway. But there is no way at all, that we can sit down, stand by, and ignore the fact that the security forces have killed. And remember, this is not charged, tried, sentenced to execution by gun, And we spend our time talking about international law and human rights. And we're heading up massive UN organizations. But have we looked at ourselves? Have we really looked at ourselves? We have not managed to curb crime, criminal activities in Jamaica. That is over there by itself. And we have the security forces. What are you telling me? In an effort to curb crime and criminal activities, you killed 311 people without trial? Who are these 311? I want every single one of their names. And this is what journalism should do. 311 names, 311 mothers, 311 father. Go to the homes. Find out who these 311 people killed by the security forces are. That is important. That is the role of journalism. And the Prime Minister wants us to celebrate because 600 odd people dead, killed this year in the civil war in Jamaica. Jamaicans killing themselves. The thing is warped. It turned upside down. Somebody retuned the entire thing. We've been talking about who retuned the nation. I don't know. But we are seeing, I don't know whose eyes we're looking out of, whose lenses we're looking out of. Who is directing the narrative? Who determine how we think about things? So I'm very concerned about this. And I'm concerned about the state of journalism in Jamaica. This is shocking that we will not report. Who wrote the first press release that say this is a big news, 40-odd percent, 41% I think decrease in crime. And yet you have 311 deaths where you never add pan it. You have to add them up. You have to put a pan it and add them up. That's a number. Because each person is a soul, one person. So who you not count? Who not count? Who not count in the amount of people who were murdered on the island last year? Who not count? Who are the 311 that not count? Online, Joy FM in Ghana is reporting that the Paga youth movement in the Upper East region of Ghana is raising serious security concerns over the repeated appearance of a particular aircraft at the Paga airstrip over 3 days, calling on the government of Ghana and national security authorities to urgently clarify the aircraft's identity, mission, and authorization. In a press release issued on Wednesday, the group said residents observed an aircraft bearing the tail number 60171, reportedly of United States origin, landing repeatedly at the airstrip. According to the youth movement, the aircraft would abruptly take off whenever community members gathered to observe or inquire about its presence, a pattern they say heightened suspicion and anxiety among residents. The situation reportedly escalated on December 31 when the aircraft landed again and was intercepted by district-level security agencies. That means that the people take it in their own hand and just intercept that, including the Ghana Police Service, the National Intelligence Bureau, the National Security Operatives, and other allied agencies. The group alleged that the occupants of the aircraft refused to disembark or cooperate with security personnel, a development they described as deeply touching. Well, them says American origin plane. So that I go to Ghana. No, it's not funny, but It leads me to, and I'll raise these questions next week, right? Because, at the beginning of each year for the first program, and this is one of the plans I had, but for what is happening in the Caribbean waters, was to look at the unsolved cases, the things I want to hear anything else about, the big cases, massive cases that come up and then you hear nothing about them. For example, the massive cocaine fine at Boscobel Airport that happened, how many years that's going into now, and what's the outcome of that? Also the plane where it crashed down in St. Elizabeth there and so on. So we have some massive drug fine. I think one also on the wharf or something to that effect. But we'll come back to those next week. But there are some cases that's just hanging out there, Justice delayed is justice denied. Just hanging out there that we tend to forget. It's journalism again, because we shouldn't forget. We must have a thing, a diary, a reminder of the cases that we need to follow, because they're national cases and they're significant cases. But journalism in Jamaica is occupied now only with what the artists them do, especially the dancehall artists them, who say what, when, where and how, and what colour hair them have and what colour frock them wear, and them something there. There's a journalism there for the most part in Jamaica now. It's a crisis. It's a crisis, and I'm in the industry. The media landscape is becoming what it is becoming, and we're choosing to become that. We don't have to, but that's what we're choosing to become. An article in today's paper. I think it's today's paper. I've got 6 of you so far sending me that very same article, and thank you for that, because the Gleaner, Andre Williams, staff reporter at the Gleaner, seems to have caught this, and he says, let me go down. The year 2025 will be remembered as a paradoxical year for Jamaica, as despite recording a historic low in overall murders, the past 12 months have been overshadowed by a grim counter trend, an unprecedented number of citizens killed by security forces. This is journalism. Andre Williams, this is journalism. And the Gleaner publishes it, and it says, between 2017 and 2025, 1,422 people were fatally shot by members of the security forces, based on figures compiled from the Independent Commission of Investigations, INDECOM, and the police. Of that total, 311 deaths occurred last year alone, accounting for approximately 22% of all fatalities recorded during the 8-year period. The concentration of deaths at the hands of members of the security forces in a single year, this concentration of deaths at the hands of his members of the security forces in a single year is unprecedented. No other year since Indicom began publishing regular statistics in 2017 has come close to producing such a large share of the overall toll, making 2025 a defining and troubling period in Jamaica's policing landscape. There is hope for journalism. I take back what I said. Andre Williams, you've done a brilliant job here. Gleaner for publishing. Kudos to you. Gordon House has become the synagogue of Satan. We're going to have to face that. We're going to have to face that. Because I don't know how. Time and I from is a minute after 9 o'clock. And we must not be afraid to say, as journalists, and those of us who stand in the spaces, to speak of these issues, especially because there seems to be a group think around crime, politics, corruption. You dare talk and them say a bad man. And I know that bad man is narcissism. So somebody must explain that to me. Usually it is a narcissist who accuses people of bad mind. So explain that to me. Anyway, we have to go to our next segment of the program. Thank you so much for joining us inside of the Africa Forum as usual, and thank you for your many, many messages coming in even as we speak. And one of the things we have been talking about since morning is the geopolitical issues as they relate to us, we the people, whether it's in the Caribbean or on the continent of Africa. My next very special guest is Charles Hyatt. He is an IT professional, DJ, husband, and father who will tell you that he lives on a purpose-driven life rooted in service to others. Born in England and raised across Jamaica and the United States, Charles Hyatt's worldview has been shaped by diverse cultures and strong life lessons passed down by his parents, most notably his mother, Dr. Vera Hyatt. Charles holds a Master of Science in Information Technology Security from Bowes State University in Maryland and a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. His professional strengths include leadership, management, training, and strong oral and written communication skills. I know that because I buck him up in a Sierra Leone, and you'd think that we know each other a long time. It was kind of a spirit meeting. Charles Hyatt Jr. How are you doing, my brother?
I am well, Kabu. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this program. I'm usually a listener, and I usually listen with a smile on my face and a smile in my heart to how you handle this program. But to actually be a member on this program or a guest on this program is just amazing to me. What a wonderful way to start 22.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm a part of the family now,
Yeah, you've been. Listen, everybody heard your name, so we're going to clear that up first. Charles Hyatt, and and then I said Charles Hyatt Jr. So, and I mentioned your mom, of course, Dr. Vera Hyatt. So let's get this out of the way and talk a little bit about your pedigree. Your dad is well known in Jamaica, Charles Hyatt, and of course, many of my listeners this morning would also recognize your mom's name, Dr. Vera Hyatt.
True. Yes. So, as far as pedigree, I'm from a normal set of family people. The Hyatt family that Charles Hyatt, who was Jamaica's actor and comedian, was the head of our household, led by, or shared with Dr. Vera Hyatt, who was, while she was in Jamaica, the deputy director of the National Gallery, and then went on to become one of the head curators at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., who, for 9 years, built the Cape Coast and Elmina Castle into the museums that they are today.
Yes.
She really has done amazing work across this world, and I wait for the time when we can actually recognize her for the work that she has done posthumously. So, Daddy, of course, movies, television, and made everybody laugh, and so that is the normal line of people that I come from.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I know your mom's work, and I think we've seen her in action. Sister P can very well remember that. She was Sister P who introduced her to us, and it was a group, so it was an individual introduction. But we met in Ghana, actually, at the Cape Coast Dungeons. All right. So what she did tell us is this is her work, and at first we misunderstood her work. Can I just say? Because people will remember that, but afterwards we recognize. And we're activists, right? So we're activists and misunderstood the word, but later on we came to recognize though and celebrated it. So thank you your mom posthumously, and I'm sure she'll be honored. You yourself, you've lived, and we met in Sierra Leone, and I remember having the conversation with you about, your sojourn in Africa. You've lived in different places in Africa. Talk to us about that.
Right. So I lived in Zimbabwe back in the early 2000s. And subsequently to that, I've traveled extensively in mostly sub-Saharan countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana. I have an affinity to Africa because ever since I landed in Zimbabwe in 2001, my life changed. If I can just give you a scenario.
Yes.
I went to Zimbabwe as a Peace Corps volunteer because I'm a U.S. citizen, and so I wanted to know Africa, and I joined the Peace Corps to get there cheaply and to be taken care of by the U.S. government. So my goal was to understand why Bob Marley chose Zimbabwe to think to sing about so exclusively, and. I'll tell you what happened. I found out on the very first day why. I was the last person off the plane that stepped on that tarmac of those. I think it was, at the time, it was 30-something volunteers. And as they were rustling us up, I was kind of off by myself with a red, green, and gold Rasta scarf around my neck because it was winter time in Zimbabwe. And a lady came over to me and asked me if I was with the group, and I said, "Yeah, man, I'm with them, but I kind of just do my thing by myself. I'm trying to take in this moment of actually being on the African continent." And she looked back and she said, "Wait, hold on, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm from the United States. I came with these guys, but I'm actually a Jamaican." And she said, a Jamaican? You stay right here. So she walks off to a group of men and says something to this group of men. Now, I have to pause you there and give you a caveat.
Yes.
Before going to Zimbabwe, I was continuously told that being in Africa as a black man, black American, will not be a good experience because they will see me as a slave return.
Oh.
And they were completely discouraging me, and I'm talking about Peace Corps, was completely discouraging me from going to Africa. So they wanted to send me to Belgium, they wanted to send me to all these countries, and I insisted that I must go to Zimbabwe. Anyway, so I had this on my mind, and I thought, Jesus Christ, you mean say the Ratakan going to start right now? I just reach here and it going to start. So now these group of 5 men and this woman come walking towards me. So I square up because I figure, say, okay, if it's this how I'm going to go home, when I'm going home with a fight.
Right.
And 2 men went behind me and 2 men came in front of me. They're not saying a word, you know. And the 2 men behind me scooped me up and put me on their shoulders.
Really?
And they all started to say, "Jamaica, welcome home." And they started to sing and all kind of things. And they took me into the immigration office on their shoulders, chanting, "Jamaica is home. Right. Jamaica is home."
Yes, yes.
Let me tell you something. Kaboom.
Wow.
Me bawl like a baby.
I can imagine. I totally understand.
Me bawl like a baby, and that has been my introduction and my experience as a Jamaican on the African continent ever since then.
We love it. And this is usually how we go home to Africa. It's either that or you get the best limos, don't it? And
yeah, man.
It's just the best treatment when we return to Africa. But we're going to talk a little bit now about Africa generally. Your interest in Africa is deep. You're coming from a family, your mom especially, that was a focus also. What else could you have done? Out of your own, though, and by having conversations with you, I know this is where you're standing, looking at Africa from all different perspectives, not least of which is the geopolitics. And so one of the things we're going to do, so our listeners know, is that this is your first interview we're going through for the month of January. You'll join us each Sunday to look at different places in Africa and to talk about what's facing Africa, what are the concerns, what are the major issues, the geopolitics of it all, if you will, going in as we enter into 2026 and moving towards 2030. So we want to kind of just go through the continent, generally the different regions, West Africa, South Africa. And when we say South, I mean Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, and Central Africa. One thing we want to do this morning is to get your perspective on what are the issues across the continent, and then to zoom in on Eastern Africa, especially the Horn of Africa. So let me take a quick break and we come forward to that. And we're looking at the continent of Africa from a geopolitical perspective. So he's wearing his professional geopolitical analyst hat this morning. So, my brother, let's look at Africa generally, and then to go to the Horn of Africa. What are some of the geopolitical issues that you have observed or you're observing that might be of concern to you, continental-wise?
Well, I mean, this conversation could go on for many months.
Yes.
But I think the most recent thing that I have been paying attention to was the end of the year. Two things happened at the end of the year. First of all, Ibrahim Traoré took over the executiveship of the Sahel states. Mm-hmm. And before he took it over, he made a very interesting speech about the Black Winter, which is coming to West Africa. Which he said Africa. Mm-hmm. And the Black Winter symbolizes that both externally and internally, there are going to be destabilizing forces that are going to try to get control of Africa again and to make Africans turn in on themselves and give up our resources. And the way that I admire Ibrahim Traoré, mm-hmm. The motto of Burkina Faso is homeland or death, mm-hmm. and it is spreading like wildfire across the African continent. And I think that whereas the Black Winter is coming, I think that the mindset of Africans is changing, mm-hmm. and people are saying homeland or death. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that was great to see happening at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a motto that we can all take on for those of us who are serious about this thing, homeland or death. Yeah.
The second thing is the foiled coup that just happened, or just was attempted to happen in Burkina Faso. Mm-hmm. That just happened a few days ago. And the same man that I think it's Damiba, that Ibrahim Traoré overthrew to take control, has been working with France and other places to try to overthrow Ibrahim Traoré, and the intelligence of the Burkina Faso army thwarted it, and that was just a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. So that is just another indication of the homeland or death. They're doing everything to make sure they're securing themselves, and it is coming from the citizens, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. The security is coming from even the citizens who sleep outside the castle gates. I mean, it's just amazing.
That's phenomenal, actually, to see citizens getting up at a certain time of the day to go protect the prime minister or the president. I mean, it's phenomenal.
It is absolutely phenomenal. Now, the last thing that I've seen that is quite telling is the move in Gabon, mm-hmm. in Central Africa, mm-hmm. that the reciprocation of the banning of all American citizens from entering the country. Yes. They just put out the edict, yes. that because the United States has banned basically 26 of the 50-something countries, mm-hmm. in Africa from entering the United States and getting any visas or anything of that nature, right. Gabon has said, okay, guess what? You can't come here.
Exactly.
And that, again, yes. I mean, we know the Sahel had done it, mm-hmm. and we know that the Sahel has reason, and we expected it to happen in the Sahel.
Mm-hmm.
But for it to happen to Gabon, to happen in Gabon, is an amazing outlook on what, again, is echoing homeland or death.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Now, if we go over to the Horn of Africa, we see we see a lot of chess being played with the ports over in Somaliland and Somalia, and the plays that Ethiopia, the play of Ethiopia that was thwarted by I am just going to say Israel, because if you remember, it was Ethiopia first who said that they would recognize Somaliland, just for the simple fact that they needed a port, right? And then all of a sudden, the Africa Union, and the United Nations said, "Oh no!" The Security Council said this cannot happen, and then all of a sudden, in swoops Israel to say, "We recognize you fully as a country." Blah blah blah. I think what we're seeing, and we're going to be seeing a lot of, is America's political or geopolitical movements to cut off the trajectory of China. And the way to do that is to try to control the trade routes that are used by countries around the world. And that is, I think, that is exactly what is happening.
Immediately, you think the Panama Canal in this region, because that's a whole other story, you know.
Exactly.
And of course.
And if you look, and I do believe that the next port that they will go after is what I'm called the Chauncey port, that China built right off the coast of South America. I think that the United States, because of its need to control the world, is going to try to attack that Chauncey port and try to take over that Chauncey port.
And this is why they're finished. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to point back to the security strategy that national security strategy that they put out a few weeks ago, which in which they are underscoring and are pains to talk about the Monroe Doctrine. We're saying it's the Monroe Doctrine and the Manifest Destiny. They deliberately left that out. But so I think this is why they are dusting off the Monroe Doctrine and making it now Monroe Doctrine 2.0. They're talking about Trump Monroe Doctrine corollary, but also Trump is saying it is a Donroe Doctrine. So that tells
Donroe, exactly.
So it tells us what time it is in terms of what their plans are for the region. So and I agree with you that I think China is at the center of all of that. What about? Oh, let me take a quick break because I'm going to ask you about South Africa, Southern Africa itself. But let me take a quick break.
It doesn't matter. The same person.
My brother Charles. I was just teasing you there. I just love the second, so I'll go with the second. All right, listen.
That's fine.
So in terms of the Southern Africa, what are you looking at there as we go into 2026 and beyond? What are the issues?
Well, what I see there is, again, the geopolitical chess move that is trying to keep South Africa in turmoil, and the obvious play to keep Julius Malema out of the game, because they know for a fact if Julius Malema gets control of the government, it is checkmate, period. Right? And so they're keeping South Africa, especially South Africa, in straight turmoil, because you can see the different infiltrations that are happening by the clandestine government, the clandestine organizations that planting all this information and making all these deals that are under the table, all of a sudden come out in the open, and it's a playbook that is repeated over and over again. Yeah. So that's what's happening in South Africa. But there is a wonderful thing happening between, let me get the names right, Botswana, Namibia, and there's a third country, I'm missing it at the moment, that they have taken on the same understanding as the Sahel nations, and they've removed their borders, and they're now negotiating as one bloc. And Botswana is making serious strides to own their resources, nationalize their resources, and then benefit from their nationalization of their resources.
Is Zimbabwe part of that? It's considering their own.
No, Zimbabwe is not in it. Zimbabwe, they asked Zimbabwe because, let's just say Zimbabwe said no for now. But it is, I believe it is Botswana, Namibia, and Rwanda. I'm not too sure. I cannot remember at the moment. But they share a border, right? The three of them share a border. And they've all removed their borders. And the people are going back and forth, working, living, whatever, without any checks at all at any checkpoints. And it is creating
that totally missed me. I didn't know that. So I look forward to hearing you comment on that widely and what the implications are of that. Is it Zambia? No? I'm just looking at the map.
I think it might be Zambia. Yes, it is Zambia. Yes.
And so and they've removed...
Yes, it's Zambia. It is Zambia.
Tell us a little bit more about that, Charles.
So it has been developing for about a year now, since what is his Botswana president, Bako? What is his name? I can't remember his name. But when he came in, he said, look, there are some things that need to happen. And one of the first things that need to happen is that we need to stop seeing each other as separate. We need to be one. And he said that his goal in his presidency is to make sure that he unifies, like Ibrahim Traore. He unifies.
His name is Duma. Duma Bako, yeah.
Duma Bako, right. And he and the lady from Namibia have been working assiduously to basically lead Sub-Saharan Africa in this unification effort. They had a forum last year where they made the announcement that it was Zambia, Namibia, and Botswana that are removing all borders, all checks at all that separate the countries, and they want to negotiate as one bloc. And they are one of the significant things that they said is that they are removing all contracts from foreign organizations that have come in and have been basically raping the country, and they are renegotiating all contracts. They're not kicking people out,
right?
But the negotiation has to happen where the countries themselves benefit.
Yeah, that I did see. All right, so this is big in Southern Africa, and it's something to follow up. I'm really looking forward to hear how you kind of pass that when we go into Southern Africa. I'm going to take another quick break, and did we do Central Africa?
Well, Gabon.
Oh yeah,
right?
so Central Africa, East Africa, West Africa. And so this is just to give our listeners an idea of where we're going to be going throughout the time that you'll be looking at geopolitics on the continent of Africa. We'll take a quick break. We come back and look a little closer at the Horn of Africa. upcoming weeks and some of the issues that we'll be raising with my very special guest, geopolitical analyst, Charles Hyatt II. Charles, before we go back to the Horn of Africa, it seems to me, just from listening to how you are approaching this, that Ibrahim Traore is central to how you move forward and the way you see Africa moving forward.
100%. That is. Let me put it this way: if you look at world history, we have been kind of depending on a single person to lead us, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it be Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Gandhi, whomever, right? Mm-hmm. A single individual. What we're seeing now is a coalition of leaders who are saying the same thing, including from going back before Hugo Chavez. Mm-hmm. When, if you look at what's happened in Venezuela recently, you'll understand that it is all about the same voice coming together from many different angles saying, we're tired of imperialism. We must stand as a group unified against this type of behavior. And on the African continent, Ibrahim Traore is that image. But the three, Assimi Goïta and Chiani and Traore, those three stand unified as one image that says we can unify and benefit from it. And if you look at what is happening with Mahama in Ghana, he is making leaps and bounds to even join the Sahel nations, right? Yeah. And the same thing happening with Chad, trying to join the Sahel nations, right? So it is a wave that we're seeing now of unity. And the old idiom that has been ringing true in reggae music about Africa Unite. It is happening.
Funny enough, it's a song I scheduled to play this morning. It's interesting. It's interesting you said that. It's one that I actually had lined up to play. But anyway. One song I would love to hear you play. It's a very simple lyrically. It's a very simple song, but it's a serious song that we must hear regularly, and that is "Sitting and Watching" by Dennis Brown. Oh, I really do not play a lot of Dennis. That's true. Sitting and watching.
Yeah, man. Sitting and watching.
Sing it for me.
If you want me to sing it, you sure you want me to do that? But the lyrics basically are saying, sitting here watching fools like themselves when they should be thinking about getting to know themselves. While life goes on, everyone's got to stand strong. We cannot surrender, right? And then he says, giving your heart and soul to vanity makes your life filled with pain and misery. While life goes on, everyone...
Pretty close back in the day, the early days of Area.
Wow.
Yeah, so I really must play
beautiful.
it. And thank you so much for reminding us of this song in particular. And we tend to rock to the rhythm of Dennis, and especially this song. But to zoom in on the lyrics is a whole other kettle of tea. Just listening to that was something else.
That is it. Yeah. And that is why I love music so much, because we have a tool called reggae music that has absolutely changed the entire world. Yes. And nobody can deny that. Yes. And when we use that tool the way it is supposed to be used, I mean, movements happen that no one can explain. It's all divine. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, when you look at Jamaica's impact on Africa, yes, it is inexplicable how Africans love Jamaica just because of the way that our music has permeated the stance of get up, stand up, stand up for your rights.
Yeah.
It's not just lyrics.
Yeah, and you witnessed this because you also, part of what you do that our listeners might not know is that you take the music across the world too.
Absolutely.
And so you'd have witnessed it from on stage, from the ground among the people themselves, a bird's eye view of how generally our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa connect to and tap into reggae music.
Yes, man. Yes, man. I give you a simple example, and I know we're talking about geopolitics, but let's just take a caveat real quick.
Yeah.
I went to a session in Zimbabwe in 2001 that had, if you can imagine this, Stone Love, Kilimanjaro, Bodyguard. There were 6 sounds.
You mean St. Anne's Bay down upper Richmond Estate? You mean down St. Anne's Bay, Richmond Estate?
No, Mr. in a Harare, Zimbabwe. But here is what is interesting.
Yes.
Every one of the sounds were carbon copies.
You serious?
You hear me tell you? They took cassettes and then burned the cassettes on dub plates, and they went to represent these sounds. Now, they were having a sound clash, which it easily had about 3,000 people in the venue. It was a big stadium, right? Because a Jamaican that went over to Zimbabwe to pick apples back in the 80s stayed and built an amazing dance hall following in Zimbabwe. I can't remember his name, but his song was called Echo Stone.
Oh.
But
is it Dennis Wilson?
There it is.
Is it Dennis?
There it is.
Are you serious?
I think so. Yes, a Rastaman. Called Lenky Rastaman.
No, we'll talk about that because I said Dennis because Dennis used to be in Zimbabwe and used to be a correspondent, but that might have been in the early 90s. But you're talking about the late 80s, mid 80s.
80s, yeah. He went over in the 80s as an apple picker and stayed.
Okay.
But anyway, in the dance, I tell you, there are 2,000 such people, right? And the place is going on. They had one turntable, and each sound or each DJ would go up and play one tune, and the place would go crazy. The night ended prematurely because one DJ decided to play one song, and the first 2 words of the song absolutely finish the dance. When I said finish, I mean it was pandemonium. People were fainting. I mean, people were being carried over the crowd, everything.
You serious? What 2 words?
And those, listen, the 2 words that caused this pandemonium were, oh no, Red Rat. Red Rat. It was ridiculous what was happening. I stood there for at least an hour and a half looking at this one song just demolish the place.
Wow.
Me say them pull it up. They pull it up for an hour and a half, you know. Just those 2 words.
It reminds me of how big Eric Donaldson is in like Ghana, and I keep saying,
oh my gosh,
he can full out a stadium and then need another stadium to full out the overflow.
Absolutely,
people just want to know that. I have a text from Busy Campbell, right? Busy Campbell, and he says, "Morning, sisterin. As a driver of the first taxi gang LP taxi connection, I will tell you how sitting and watching song was done." I'm Mr. Busy, tell me, please. We love that. So Busy, could I tell me how it was
beautiful
done? No, but
I love that.
Yes, so the geopolitics, we cannot leave the music out of the geopolitics, and this is why we went off a bit, and especially the role of reggae music on the continent of Africa and in the liberation movements, because remember, this is how Bob Marley is so well loved in Zimbabwe in terms of having gone there, that concert that he did in the rain, and not to liberate Zimbabwe, right?
Yes, but Kabul, let me pause you there for a minute. Do you know that concert was held in a city called Mbare, right? It's a neighborhood called Mbare. Mbare has a prison.
Yes.
Or it had a prison. And when I say had, Bob Marley finished it, closed that prison basically.
Wow.
Let me tell you how he did that. The concert that he had in Mbare, which is a real ghetto area, right? It was a downtrodden, what them call a shantytown, basically, right?
Yes.
The concert was being held beside the prison. You know, so the prisoners put pressure on the wall of the prison, so much so that it bust a hole through the wall, and the prisoners came flooding into the venue.
Wow. Yes.
Guess what, though? When I was there in 2001, I was living in a place called South Downs, which was not far from Mbare. So I said, I want to go to see this place. The hole is still there. They refused to open it. They refused to close it.
Yeah.
Because it was created by Bob Marley.
Significant energy, frequency, and vibration. Loud hole in the wall. So Busy says, Dennis just walked into the studio. That's Dennis Brown. And the rhythm was playing, and he said, hold the rhythm there. That means we have to play it again. Hold the rhythm there. I love that. And so let me take a little bit more of that, since Dennis did say hold the rhythm there. And hear the rhythm. You know what I find interesting about this, and Busy probably can tell me, because Busy is texting me while we're on, which is I'm wondering if he just kind of just write a rhythm and make the lyrics up as he went along. I mean, the lyrics are very, very good, but it would be interesting if him just come in and write a rhythm and the lyrics just kind of flow like that. That would be quite something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to understand, say, not only are the lyrics nicely written and they flow very well, but they are unbound by time, because it's the same message we have said today.
That's right. Yeah.
When you have ones and ones where travel to other countries and put on religious things that is have no ties to their religious beliefs whatsoever, and start kiss walls and kiss hands, just to show that we're a part of you, and have nothing to do with saving the people of their own country.
Yes.
I mean, these are the things. Giving your heart and soul to vanity fills you with pain and misery.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a serious statement.
Busy says,
that is relevant.
Busy says, Sly can confirm this, because I said, number one, you had Jimmy Riley, Tamlins, Blanca Who, Junior Delgado, Gator, and was all waiting to be recorded. No, this is history. We're going to have to get Busy in to talk about these things. Busy, thank you so much for the backstory to this song that Charles asked us to play more of. Charles, you see how I think we still connect to Africa, to the Horn of Africa, and especially to Ethiopia, because this is Rastafari, and Ethiopia was introduced to us in a very serious way. I mean, it was always in the Bible for those who were going to church, but it was in there in such a way as to put it down. It's like somebody else convert us to something, when Christianity existed on the continent of Africa long before European Christianity. But so that there is a connection between Rastafari, obviously a serious connection. It's a homeland, it's Africa or death. It is a homeland or death for Rastafari when it comes to Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia, of course, in the Horn of Africa, and the Grand Renaissance Dam is also a big issue there. And we see Egypt now raising its angry head, if you will, at Ethiopia. How do you see this playing out? And any intention of kind of looking at that as we go down the following weeks, as we go through the following weeks?
Well, what is true is that Egypt is going to have to keep at them out, because there's been a negotiation back and forth with Ethiopia and Egypt see who is controlling the Nile and who is doing this and who can do a dam and blah, blah, blah. And Ethiopia said, sir, you're trying to stop progress in this continent. We're bringing power. We're bringing all kinds of things with this dam that is going to benefit the entire region. And we're just going to do this. So the reason I said Egypt has to keep it in mode is in order for Egypt's focus to become a reality, they will have to roll back the benefits of the dam. And that is just ridiculous for them to try to say, we're not going to like this dam to be commissioned because we want things to go back to what they were. When the dam is benefiting, Egypt is benefiting everyone. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think aren't we playing? It's in the same thing in the Caribbean. We had a discussion this morning with Professor Isaac Seni. Part of what we talked about was the parallels between the 1930s, which led to World War II. And what we see happening in the Caribbean waters now, and not just the Caribbean waters, but generally. And it's the very same thing, for Egypt, that whole dam situation, the Nile. Remember, the Nile was a big part of all of that period. And so we have these very same issues raising their heads again. Wherever we look, we see parallels of the 1930s. Isn't this phenomenal?
It is phenomenal because what we as the citizens of the world are allowing to happen is the same playbook to be repeated over and over and over again, like we don't evolve as humans. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
and that is why the stance has to be that we cannot surrender, right? And that's it goes back to the song we're talking about. We cannot surrender. Wildlife goes on. Everyone's got to hang on. You cannot surrender. This is foolishness just being repeated by the same set of cult leaders or cult members that want to control the resources and power of this world. And we cannot let it happen. We have to move forward. We have to innovate. We have to evolve.
And is this why Ibrahim Traore is so important to the conversation going forward? And the Sahel.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I don't want us as African people, as Jamaican people, to say Ibrahim Traore as the one.
Yes.
There are many that we all should big up and we all should celebrate. The three in the Sahel. Bako in Botswana, the lady in Namibia.
Nandi, I think,
there's so many people that we have to sing their song.
And we must bring their names forward. And I think this is part of our responsibility as we go into these conversations, is to bring all their names forward as we go through this process. Yeah. I take that on.
100%. I was talking to an entertainer, a very popular entertainer out of Jamaica, and I said to him, why is it that we don't hear songs about Ibrahim Traore or Assimi Goita or those guys or those people in Africa that are absolutely going against the grain and standing up for African rights and everything? And the individual, again, this is a huge artist in Jamaica. He said, sir, we're afraid of visa problems. I said, wait a minute, Star. What we are talking about? You mean to tell me, say, well, I mean, I kind of just left the conversation because, say, everybody's reality is them reality. Yeah. You understand?
Yeah.
But we, the citizens, because remember, we play their music and we buy their music.
Right.
We have to make certain demands of our entertainers that them stop with the foolishness.
Right.
And start to go back and pen some music that actually means something for our culture.
How important is that? How important is that? Because I know we're coming from a culture, and this is something that we're used to. We're coming from the Bob Marleys and the Dennis Browns and Freddie McGregor. That's how we in a 4 age group. We're coming from that space where even if I sing love songs, it's revolutionary. Peter Tosh and, and all of them, that they were very purposeful about, what they were, how they were commenting on what was happening, or putting it in perspective, analyzing it through the music. So, but that has changed, not just in Jamaica, but there seems to be a global change where the music really doesn't speak to the struggles of the people or to liberation.
Well, what I can tell you is that might not be a fully true statement, because the music is still there. Okay. I mean, because we have the Lila Ikes, we have the Chronics, we have Kes Namdi. If you look at the Grammy nomination list, 3 out of the 4, every artist that are now being put for Grammys.
But remember the premise of the conversation, which is that how come we don't hear Ibrahim Traore, or we don't hear these people in the music?
I understand what you're
saying. So are they doing those kind of music, or are they? And I love these people. Kes Namdi was supposed to be on the program this morning. I had to cancel because of what happened in Venezuela. But the point I'm making is, so the question you raised to the artist was, why aren't we hearing about Ibrahim Traore, for example, in the music, and the response you got? So it means then that even those who are doing the conscious lyrics are not necessarily doing those kinds of music.
What they're not necessarily doing, which the Bobs and the Peter Toshes and everybody did, is they're not taking chances.
Okay.
They're having social commentary, but they're not taking chances.
All right, point
and
taken.
That is the difference. That is the difference with the music.
Yeah.
They're being safe.
Yes.
Whereas, especially Peter Tosh, who was one of the biggest supporters of Palestine back in the day, right? They took chances and they stood up for something
and introduced the apartheid struggle through music.
Exactly
to Jamaica.
Exactly. So that's the problem I have with the music that is done. They're doing conscious music, but they're not taking chances and not educating the people. Because remember, so reggae music is social commentary, right? And even though you have your dancehall music and everything, and dancehall is evolving to what it is now and whatever.
Excuse me, let me bring Big A into this conversation. Let me bring Big A on the conversation.
Big up Big A, man.
Big A said the name of 2026, we must leave him alone.
I got myself in enough trouble.
What kind of trouble you get you? What kind of trouble you get you today? Listen,
people hate me from the position.
Because people hate him for his position. It's just it's reggae music, and that we're talking about. I know you're hearing it. You're not hearing it. You're not on a headphone.
No.
Listen.
Actually, I heard the discussion coming down, but it was pitchy patchy because of the reception.
Okay, right. So you don't hear what we're saying, but so Big A refused to participate because
I know you have a very knowledgeable guest.
Yeah. I do have that's true. He says I have a knowledgeable guest, and that is true. So Charles, just to wrap things up, and because you're going to come back next week, and I don't think that we can have this conversation without putting Jamaica in the center of it, because it is what it is, right? When we talk about
that is true.
Geopolitics, it's just the isness of things, and this is why I think both of us interest, which is reggae music, wouldn't necessarily flow into this conversation. But you're saying that for Ibrahim Traore, for others on the continent of Africa who are doing so well, these are the people we should foreground. But one of the ways that we can also do that is, as we have done over time, is for the singers and players of instrument to bring them forward first, to go first, if you will.
100. Absolutely. Right. It has to happen, because that is how Jamaica's message has gotten to the world. It's through the music. And Jamaica's message has influenced the world through the music. So the best way to educate and to tell our people to get up and stand up is by doing it in the music.
All right. You agree, Big A? the best way to grab the microphone. Because Big A is here now, and it's him. We're nearly in a theme time now, So, thank you to our listeners for listening. This is a conversation we've had before in a Big A, in terms of where the music was going. It's also your concern.
By the way,
right?
Happy New Year.
Oh, same to you too. Happy Babylon New Year.
And to your guest.
Yes,
Happy
this
New
is
Year
this
to
is
you,
Charles Hyatt Jr.
Happy New Year.
Oh,
Charles Hyatt the second.
What you saying to me? I have had conversation with him before.
Well, there you go.
Some years ago, and it overdue. It overdue, Bridget.
Yes, man, absolutely, and we will keep it up, man.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
All right, listen, and for a little bit of the conversation I caught, you have to remember though, and this is in reference to you saying that we're not talking more about what is happening on the continent in terms of what is happening in Burkina Faso and so on. You have to remember though, Kabu, that in the 70s, when we were championing that movement, right, the anti-apartheid movement and so on, you have to remember that it was in our face here in Jamaica. Meaning that the sanctions were real. We saw it in the news every day what Jamaica was doing for the fight and that kind of thing. So it was easy to relate to what was happening in South Africa because it was part of us. We felt it immediately when we walked out of our doors.
But it was the music that brought it to us, though,
No, I think that was mirrored though by what was happening in the political space. We know that we saw that Jamaica was leading in terms of sanctions and that kind of thing on the continent. So it was easy to speak about it, and it was relevant. We don't see that happening here in
because
the space.
Jamaica, I get the point, because Jamaica, without any ideological foundation now,
right,
really doesn't take the stance of the oppressed anymore. Jamaica is now on the side of the oppressor.
Pretty much, yeah. Right, and
well said.
And it is reflected in the music. So why do we need to talk about Burkina Faso, for example? We don't see it happening in real time, in our space. So it is distant. We have to go read up on some book now and go to some remote space to find out what is happening on the continent.
True.
In the 70s, it was our news. It was our diet. And you understand?
Yeah.
So it was a far easier experience to relate to that kind of experience as opposed to now.
That makes sense, Charles?
Yeah, but what Big A is saying very clearly is that it is systemic. So that is what we have to pay attention to. The system has changed to distract us from the realities of what is happening in the world that we are impacting.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a very serious statement.
Yeah. It is something to chew on, something to think about, and I know that the ongoing conversations will include this. I'll just block a nice little space and tell Big A if you come in early and we'll have these conversations. No, it's necessary. No, we've had these conversations. Because what does it say about reggae music? Because I heard you earlier, Charles. I mean, you said reggae music is revolutionary music or protest music, something, right? That's what, conscious music, revolutionary music.
Conscious music, yeah.
Right, so that if it is what it is, then what isn't reggae music? It's so even when is it I'm Big A have this conversation already. Because obviously reggae is reggae. I mean, you're talking about the beats, you're talking about the rhythms and so on. But so you can put anything on it. Is it wholesome reggae when you add now the conscious lyrics, the revolutionary music, and then what if you don't?
Well, you see, the thing about it is that reggae music, the sound of reggae music does not do well with foolishness, right? You can't sing. I can't think of a song, and Big A, you probably would know better than me, of a reggae song that chats stupidness.
Yeah, yes, there is.
You see, Fargo.
No, you have remember, you know, remember, you know that especially toasting and the early forms of DJing.
Yeah. No man, a reggae music.
No. Yeah, and
you kind of gone purist in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of reggae songs that.
Which one?
No, all right. You remember, you know, there's a classic example, and this is not necessarily a reggae song, but it was covered in reggae. A whiter shade of pale, right? No, a whiter shade of pale don't make no sense at all, you know,
but
right?
You mean it makes sense?
No. Will somebody explain? Would you try and explain it to me?
I will next week.
All right, explain it to me, right? No.
It's a commentary
on what? Skip a line, fandango. Yes. Right. No. So I'm just saying that it was written to prove that melodies supersede lyrical sense.
Oh, really?
Right. And I think that sometimes in